Okay, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Apolo Ohno, who's an 8-time Olympic medalist, a keynote speaker, a New York Times bestselling author, an investor, mental health advocate. Apolo, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me.
So, Apolo, let me start by asking you a question which I'm sure you've answered 1,000 times, but what is it that attracted you as a child to skating and speed skating and specifically?
Well, it's an easy answer. So at the age of 12, I was like any typical kind of young kid in the United States. I was playing, I was involved in many different activities. I originally wanted to play different types of sports, like traditional American stick and ball sports, soccer, baseball, football, basketball. I even wanted to be a boxer. My dad said no to that. He definitely said no to football. He didn't want me to have any head concussive injuries of any kind. But I had seen short track speed skating in 1992, back when we used to watch it as a family on TV, and I fell in love with the sport. I had routinely been going to the local roller skating rink on Friday and Saturday nights. I grew up in Seattle, so rains a lot. So that my dad needed a safe place to drop his son off when he was kind of wanting to go play, and that's why I learned how to roller skate. And the kind of talk and buzz of the town was about how the inline speed skating team or the roller skating team was not in the Olympics, but short track speed skating was. It was originally debuted as a exhibition sport, which means like it's kind of trial in the sport of in the Olympics during the 1988 Olympic Games. And upon that process, I fell in love with it in 1992, and it was really simple. To me, as a young 12-year-old, it looked like these athletes speeding around this, ice hockey rink, wearing these 17-inch long samurai swords, leaning over these impossible angles, and it just looked supernatural. It looked amazing. So the next phase of that was to ask my dad for a pair of speed skates. And then growing up in Seattle, Vancouver, BC in Canada is really only 2.5 hours from where I used to live, maybe about 3 hours, a drive. So my father drove me across the border, and the Canadians being so wild about winter sports, that's when the real love for the sport and appreciation began, because I got to see it live. And when you see short track speed skating live, it looks fake. It doesn't look possible that these athletes can lean over at these angles without falling down. And they're just whipping around this, this little tiny little ice rink on these little blades. And in my head, I said, I want to try that. Like, I have to try that. I want to do that. I had an affinity as a young child towards speed and competitiveness in sports in general. I had a ton of energy, but this was different. And I naturally picked it up really quickly. It became something that I had a really innate natural talent for, which helped me progress in the sport rapidly. And through the love and the support and the endearing kind of everlasting pushing of my father, he had pushed me to think about this thing in a more professional perspective, which would be to then go and compete and represent the United States in the Olympic Games.
Yeah, of course. What do you think was the key inflection point where you kind of decided, okay, this is a fun sport or whatever, and to actually make it a profession and, to professionally become a professional speed skater or, to go for the Olympics? I mean, what was kind of the key inflection point?
The key inflection point for me was failing when I probably could have made an existing team. So I'll just give you some traction there. My first Olympic trials, I was 15 years old. The previous year, when I was 14, I had excelled so quickly and so abruptly in the sport, almost like a prodigy, that I had propelled myself to be ranked #1 in the United States as a skater, not just for my age group, but for all skaters in the United States. So I was the best athlete in the United States when I was 14 years old. And then the following year, in my first Olympic trials, I finished dead last in those trials. So in a very compressed, short time frame, I had climbed to the top of the mountain and then fallen again. Here's the thing that I think is so powerful about this moment is that I had never taken the sport really that seriously up to that point. It was just fun. It was pure play. It was childlike play combined with this really unique ability that I had, which was to compete. And my technical ability, my feel on the ice was abnormally proficient for someone who only really been skating professionally or with training for 1 year. But without doing the specific work and the dedication, the sacrifice needed to take it to the next level, which would be, I guess we can call it professional. My brain, at least I wasn't ready to take that leap yet. And so I'd just kind of gone through the motions. I was very defiant in the forms of any forms of authority, et cetera, my coaches. And I just didn't put the work in. But it was after the pain psychologically that I felt of not making the following year's team and actually being dead last, which reignited this passion and hunger and desire to do and go outside the realms of what normal thought processes were of training and recovery and effort and dedication. And that's where this obsessiveness came from. So at the age of 15 is when something switched in my brain, where there was this incident that happened where I didn't get what I wanted, although I felt like I deserved it and I felt like I could have it and I could achieve it, but I'd thrown it away. And so there was some shame, some guilt, some fear, all these types of emotions that were kind of bubbling and embedding into the psyche. And then I used that as leverage to propel me into an arena where, well, I never want to feel that ever again. And so the only way I know how to feel that, never feel that again, is to build this reinforcement of armor psychologically and then through my quads, right? And through training. And then that began this complete maniacal training regime that I feel like was at the time really unmatched, and it helped me propel, at least from a psychological edge and perspective, to an arena that others hadn't thought about going down. So that was the aha moment, was that I want to take this seriously. I believe I have the skill set and ability to do so. I can't let my fears erode my ability to be free on the ice, because when in speed skating, there's a very fine line between trying too hard and not trying hard enough. And I'm sure this is like really with anything in life. There's this really beautiful thin line that you skate. And on that thin line is this, it's almost this flow state where it's very easy and very fluid. And the motion is, it's actually like a little bit of a dance. And it's no longer feeling forced. It feels completely automatic and very natural. And I was addicted to that feeling, but it started from a place of pain.
And is that kind of obsessiveness? I mean, had you exhibited that before, or really that hadn't happened until this skating aha moment that you talk about?
Well, it's hard for me to, I guess it's hard for me to really understand where I had this obsessiveness come from. You know, as a really young child, I was a voracious reader. My father would tell me that I would just burn through books, book after book after book, and I just would read, and whether it was fiction or nonfiction, I just had a voracious appetite, I think, for information digesting. And as a part of that, I think, you know, maybe clinically I was diagnosed with ADD, or something of the kind, where, you know, I was highly rambunctious. I couldn't stay focused in class. I got bored very easy. But when I did focus, it was like the world melted around me. And I was this metamorphosis of this incredible entrance into the world of, I had these blinder binoculars on that allowed me to see so clearly, but dissolve the rest of the world around me, which is ideally what we want to have when we're in complete flow state, whether you're in a conversation with you and I, or you're at a party and you're networking and you're having a conversation with something and the buzz seems to kind of dissipate and now you're just totally with that person. That's just a small inkling of what we were able to do on the ice. And so I think I did that early on when I was reading. You know, I was a swimmer, and I think I had some moments there. And even now, you know, 14 years retired from the world of the Olympics, I touch that realm of flow state quite often, and it's a beautiful thing.
Tell me, I'm curious to know, while you're a professional skater, while you're competing in the Olympics, training every single day, at what point did you actually give thought to what you would do after skating? Obviously, you knew you weren't going to do that forever, but I'm just curious, did you give any thought to it, or you just skated until you stopped and then you gave it thought, or did you kind of start thinking about beforehand, like, what am I going to do after skating?
I had always wanted to know what I was going to do after skating, and I had absolutely no idea. And it was almost this elusive. The more that I asked myself, the further away that it felt the answer was.
Yeah.
So, you know, look, I had been surrounded by enough people because of the success of the sport who started to initiate these really important conversations and questions. Apolo, what would you like to do when you retire from sport?
Yeah,
And what would you like your legacy to be in sport? And there is a piece of paper that I had written down on. This might have been in the year 1999 or 2000. I was 17 years old. And as a part of this exercise that we did, we used to have these camps that come together, all the Winter Olympic athletes, and we would, you know, corroborate our different stories and ideas, and we would just, it was this amazing kind of amalgamation of the minds of different sports to talk about the next few years in lieu of an Olympic Games that we're preparing for. And as a part of one of these exercises that we were all participating in, we were tasked with writing down what we would like to be remembered for, by, and any other forms of legacy when we step away from sport. And I remember writing down had nothing to do with what I wanted to do after sport and everything with what I wanted to do accomplished in sport. Greatest speed skater ever, reinvent the way that we thought about training and recovery, win the most amount of all these things. I forgot that I had written down this piece of paper until many, many years later. It's still in Utah, actually. I think at one of the ice rinks there. But the reason why I share that story with you is because I had approached the career as if there was no parachute. And so there was always this do or die attitude in everything that I had done. And looking back, it was very dangerous, right? There was no plan B. I could have very easily gotten injured, been taken out from competition, and forever my world had been changed. And that probably would have been extremely devastating to me psychologically, because I just didn't know how to switch. I didn't know how to pivot. I only knew how to pivot on the ice. I didn't know how to translate that pivot into the next field of exploration of who Apolo is, what am I interested in, what do I want to contribute to society, to my community, to the world? What is my civic responsibility of these duties that I've learned throughout the Olympianism, symbolism, and experiences therein? And how do I process these things in a way that I can just show up fully in the world? I didn't know these things. And it's funny because people had been talking to me about this for 2 Olympics, from my second Olympic Games, my third Olympic Games. I would say confidants and mentors had said, prepare for when the spotlight is no longer on you. But I tell you, it doesn't feel like it ever ends. It just feels like you're living in this infinite moment that's not going to end. And with all things in life, we know that they do end, and they blossom again, and there's changes and there's tides, and nothing is infinite, right? That we can maybe tangibly touch and feel. And so I think the real conversation began about 2 years after I had retired. I had retired in 2010. That was my final Olympic Games. And upon retirement began the question that I'm sure many people have asked themselves before: what now? Right. And so I had written about this in this book called Hard Pivot, and I talk about the great divorce. Now, I have never been married, but I can imagine a small inkling of the feeling that you get when the one true love that you have, the thing that you've dedicated your life to, that's nurtured you, that you've built together, that has taught you, like this, says, no more. It's over. And I felt that in 2012. And so for a split second, I said to myself, well, maybe I can come back to speed skate. Maybe I can come out of retirement. Maybe I should start skating again. And I think that is the curse, because sure, maybe I would have been able to come back to the sport and made a couple more Olympic teams. And then what? I've just kicked the can down the road. So having the real conversation of what it is that I want to do in this world. And I can tell you, Richard, I just had this conversation a week ago with myself again. So this it's ever evolving. I think that I get more triangulation, the clarity of the purpose of how to show up fully. It does morph and change probably every couple of years, maybe every 5 or 7 years. But it does feel like the question is always there. And maybe that's a question of those who are in faith-based, those who are, religious-based, whatever the thing is that you are subscribing to and you feel attached to and you feel part of. The question doesn't seem to elude anyone, and it didn't for me. And thus began the quest and the interest of, well, how do I learn these basic skills that have been dormant or maybe not even activated for most of my adult Olympic career? And taking that first step was scary. And it really, what it started with, just this beginner's mind of learning to throw out what I thought the world and how the world worked and my view of the world, which was very narrow. And it was effectively just in the world of sport.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And learn about empathy and vulnerability. And those two things, that empathy and vulnerability in the world that we grew up in sport, those are non-starter conversations. The empathy would show weakness because if something goes your way, you take it, right? Vulnerability, well, I'm not going to show any cracks in this, this fake armor that I have on because I'm invincible. And so it's this weird interplay between being human and being almost robotic and machine-like in sport, and kind of smiling through it all, no matter how much your pain is on the inside. And as I grow and the years that, I look back on my past self and I think, I recognize who that person was, that Apollo who was competing. And I try to draw from those moments the strength and inspiration and some of those incredible life lessons. But the entirety of that person was fractured, perhaps, and incomplete. And as I seek to be a more wholesome participant in Mother Earth and all the things that I do, I think that those things are really important to want to explore. And that's how my quest began to try to what the hell do I want to do now? Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit fast forward now. I mean, that was 12 years ago or almost 12 years ago. Where has that quest led you to? What is the message? I mean, you're a speaker, you're an author, you do a lot of different things. Give me a feel for now, kind of how that has evolved to your message and vision today.
Yeah. So the time that I spend is kind of divided up into three different parts. One of them would be I spend a lot of time investing and analyzing and advising all health and wellness related technology companies. Anything that helps improve the quality of life for an individual, whether it be sleep, nutrition, supplementation, exercise, physiology, mindfulness, meditation. That's the 133% of my time is spent there. How do we create a world where the quality of our life is increasing? The secondary part is one that perhaps I'm really the most passionate about, and that is about having conversations about both high performance mindset, wellness, longevity, overall breadth of our work environment, and how do we fuse this inner confidence and belief that we know is there, but perhaps that light switch has been off for a very long time. So I do a ton of public speaking, a lot of motivational talks, panels, workshops with organizations, mostly Fortune 1000. But really, I spend a lot of time traveling and having these discussions with organizations and teams and executive boards about how do we show up in the world, both for our companies, our shareholders and stakeholders, but also for ourselves in the way that we have a true breadth of conscious capitalism. We understand that we can do good and be good at the same time, while also paying attention to the requirements of our shareholders and stakeholders. So I think we've got this whole breadth and idea of how do we be highly performant, but also highly human, right? Because we are here for a truly finite amount of time. And just reminding folks that, hey, the Apollo way may not be for you, but the idea is how do we create a conversation between you and I when I'm on stage or when we're in a workroom together to be able to remind you that you can guide to your own inner voice and start to turn on that inner intuition. And for a long time, Richard, I had turned my intuition had been muted. I'd been suppressing it while chasing other things, only to realize that most of the answers, not all, but most of the answers that I had were actually already contained within me. I needed to listen more. But I was so afraid to listen because of fear of failure. I was living between the prison of my own two ears, which is, sometimes the world's strongest prison. And the way for me to break free from those shackles, those self-imposed shackles, was to be able to go out there in the world to live truly authentic, with my heart first, and just continue on with this consistent quest to try to make the world a better place. And I believe that business is an incredible way to make the world a better place. It enacts teamwork. It creates hardship at times. It has all kinds of challenges. There's all types of subscriptions, different belief systems. You're just thrown into this stewing pot of stuff that you have to navigate through. And we as human beings have shown in the past that we can navigate through the most horrific of situations. And so doing so consistently, it's my dream to be able to impart upon people the idea that don't ever forget that we have a finite world that we live in. We have a finite amount of resources, which is time, and to really live your life the most authentic way possible so that you can show up fully, not only for your profession, your career, but for your family and ultimately for yourself, right? So that means removing the brick from the break, trying to eliminate the self-saboteur that perhaps may be plaguing many of us, and in pursuing this quest of just how do I show up in the world the way that I know that I can. So that's my passion. And then the last thing is I typically just advise companies. So very close friend of mine, he basically buys a lot of American industry manufacturing buildings and businesses. And so he has this cross between, industrial real estate arm mixed with private equity. Wow, so those are the three things. Yeah.
I mean, each one of those could be a full-time job. Tell me, how do you, where does the authorship? I know you've written a couple of books. Where does that fit in? Is that in the center bucket, or which bucket, or is that a fourth bucket?
No, I think that honestly, so the writing and the creative aspect is something that I draw inspiration from those that I deeply admire. So I
Mhm.
would say that it crosses all three of those chasms, right? There's a bit of the health and wellness component there because I just know that physiologically, I know how to change the body to elicit a hormonal response and a chemical release to make me feel a certain way naturally,
Mhm.
right? There's no exogenous compounds being used. I know how to do this in the most natural of states. And I believe that the human body is meant to move in some capacity. And so I've got that element. I've got the idea of writing from, and it really drives some inspiration. For me, I can't help but I naturally am an inspired, motivated person. And I draw inspiration from so many stories around the world. And I see these artists and their life history. It's so beautiful and challenging and heavy at the same time. It is the world, and I want to bring what is the world back into the writing realm so
Mhm.
that people can have some sort of beneficial experience when they do read the books that I write. So,
Mhm.
look, I've got this book here, this hard pivot. I just wrote this book 2 years ago. I'm beginning to write a third book. So right
Wow.
now it's very slow. This one I will take my time with, whether it takes me 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, but I'm just starting to sketch the ideas around this kind of masterclass of stoicism that I have read about to the great writers of like Ryan Holiday, who focuses mainly on,
Mhm.
all of his great work in the world of Stoicism, and really just trying to tie in these pieces of experiences that I've had from life because of the position that I've been in from notoriety and recognizability. I've been in some wild rooms and had conversations with people that it all feels like a dream.
Yeah, yeah.
And the idea is just to disseminate some of these things into excerpts that people can digest and hopefully apply to their everyday life to live more fully.
Now, when you look into your future, I mean, you're such a young guy, you've got so many decades more to go. Do you
Mhm.
kind of have
I hope so.
do you have like, milestones you want to get to, or things you still want to accomplish, or do you just, stay in the zone and kind of just sort of do this and then see what happens or see where this takes you? How do you view your future life?
Yeah, well, 10 years ago, if you had asked me this question, it was very specific. I was like, I want to make X dollars. I want to be X amount rich. That was the goal because I had
Uh-huh.
thought that was the game. I thought
Right.
the game was looking on the scoreboard and seeing the number of zeros there. I thought that was it.
Yep.
I would say, and maybe that is for some, whatever I think is pursuing or that you want to pursue is totally up to you. For me, I gain much more, I think, self fulfillment out of the contribution component. And
Mm.
so all of the things that I want to do today, really, if I was going to fast forward 5 years, I want to be able to look myself in the mirror and say, through it all, was it worth it? And I want to be able to smile. That's
Mm.
the goal.
Mm.
So look, I can't control whether the businesses that I touch or I'm involved with are successful. I can
Right.
only give all of myself to those things. That is the ultimate crescendo, so to speak, is can I exhaust myself, leaving no stones unturned? And I take great pleasure and ownership over those things, even if they didn't pan out the way that I had dreamed.
Mm.
And sometimes that's how the world and universe and life works.
Mm.
So surrendering to the outcomes is a part of that. But really, if I was going to get more granular, I would say in 5 years, the goal is to continuously keep inspiring people, to continuously keep creating in
Mm.
whatever art form that it is. For me, my creative realm is really it used to be on the ice. Now it's being on stage. Now
Mm.
it's about curating these conversations that
Mm.
are deeper, that are
Mm.
beyond skin deep, that go really down to the soul and to the heart of the human being to draw out the most innermost powerful aspects. And as we know, that is the defining factor, I think, a lot of times of life. And so we keep it so shielded because it feels so sacred, and we don't show it to many people. And my dream and goal is to be able to open that up in a
Mm.
way that that is our own individuality. As Carl Jung said, the individuation process of trying to dig deeper into the self
Mm.
is your superpower.
Mm.
And I think that the devices that we use are incredible tools. They are remarkable, but they're also incredibly distracting, and they take us away from listening because we're listening to others versus listening internally. And that's, I guess that would be my goal, is to hopefully make the world a better place, more peaceful, and also just to live with a little more spiritual love, if that's, doesn't sound too foo-foo.
If somebody had come up to Apolo Ohno when he was at the height of his Olympic skating career and said, "This is what you'd be doing 12 years from now," what would your reaction have been?
I wouldn't have believed it. I wouldn't have believed it. Richard, when I first came to Los Angeles, I had thought that my path was supposed to be an actor, and not because I loved acting. I mean, I had appreciation for actors and the arts, but I don't know. It's, I was like a sheep. It's like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to move to LA and I guess go in the entertainment industry. And very quickly did I realize that while I had a profound love for the arts and acting, I was not an actor. I was not cut out for it. And I have so much respect for those that do, because it is a very brutally hard business. And when it's done right, it is fascinating. It's incredible. So if you had asked me those questions back then, I did not know. I mean, I didn't know how the world worked. I didn't know anything. I always say I was a 27, 28-year-old going on 17.
Well, Apolo, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your sharing it and hearing about your success. When you decide to, or when you finish that third book, please come back and tell me about it.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me, Richard.
This is Richard Hsu and Apolo Ohno. Thanks.